Baruchim Haboim, Erev Tov, and the rest of my presentation is going to be in English. Thank you. So I know this session was supposed to end at 7 p.m. That gives me minus 2 minutes to get through the presentation. I hope you'll indulge me a little bit. Just a bit of background on how I came to be associated with the water system. I was visiting my aunt and uncle who lived about 5 miles from this picturesque upstate New York village when I was 7 years old. And driving past this village, my aunt said, "A year from now, this town won't be here. It's being flooded to make drinking water for New York City." And as a 7-year-old, all I could do was say, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And it's kind of traumatizing for a 7-year-old to be exposed to the concepts of eminent domain. But she was right. It was the village of Cannonsville, which in 1964 reopened as Cannonsville Reservoir, which was the last of 19 reservoirs that were constructed as part of the New York City water system. This is where New York gets its water from. Virtually all of it comes from the Catskill and Delaware watersheds west of the Hudson. But New York City's water system started 175 years ago in 1842 with the completion of the Croton Aqueduct, which brought fresh water to New York City from upstate for the first time. The original Croton Aqueduct is now a linear state park, and this aqueduct, which carried water from the Bronx across the Harlem River into Manhattan, was reopened just 2 years ago as the High Bridge, and it's now a pedestrian and bike path. So we've made some technological advances in the water supply system, including robotic monitoring of water quality, in addition to the manual samples that we take at every step along the way. We do over 500,000 tests on water quality each year from the furthest away reservoir, 150 miles away, all the way through the 1,000 gray boxes you see mounted on the sidewalk throughout the city, where we take daily samples of water in the distribution system. We've made a lot of investments in water treatment over the last 10 years. The Croton Water Filtration Plant, the photo above, is built 100 feet below Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. It cost $3.2 billion to construct, and at the time the construction contract was let in 2006. It was the largest construction contract the city had ever awarded. The plant became operational a few years ago. It can filter up to 290 million gallons a day, which is about a third of the 1 billion gallons of water a day that New Yorkers and the 8.4 million New Yorkers and the 1 million upstate residents who receive New York City water consume. The investment at the bottom was, we got a little bit more bang for the buck. For a mere $1.6 billion, we built a 2 billion gallon per day ultraviolet treatment plant. So that treats virtually all the water that New York City consumes now. It's the largest ultraviolet plant in the US. It's got more capacity than all the other ultraviolet plants combined, and was really built with the future in mind, because it can process 2 billion gallons of water a day while New Yorkers consume only 1 billion. There's been a lot of talk today about water conservation and drip irrigation. So here we have something on a somewhat different scale. The Delaware Aqueduct, which was built starting in the 1930s and carries half of New York's water supply, has been leaking. We've known about it since the mid-90s. It leaks anywhere from 15 to 35 million gallons a day. For perspective, that's about the amount of water that the city of Albany consumes every day. So rather than plug the leak, we're building a $1 billion, 2.5-mile bypass tunnel. 2 vertical shafts have already been completed on each side of the Hudson River, 700 and 900 feet below ground. And the construction of the tunnel itself is proceeding, and that's the tunnel boring machine being assembled at the top. When the new tunnel is completed and is connected to the existing Delaware Aqueduct, the Delaware Aqueduct is going to have to be shut down for the number of months it takes to connect. And that's where the water conservation in New York City and certain water supply augmentation steps that we've been taking over the last few decades will pay dividends. The water supply system has to be protected also. The system has its own police force. It's currently about 200 officers. It started in 1907 when we crossed the Hudson River for the first time to expand the water system. The original purpose of the police back then were to protect the local townspeople from the thousands of construction laborers coming into their community. After 9/11, of course, the focus shifted, and their mission now is solely to protect the water system. The force doubled in size after 9/11, and then it increased another 30% with the opening of the Croton filtration plant and the UV plant. When the water comes inside the city limits, it becomes the operational responsibility of the Division of Water and Sewer Operations. Most of the public in New York associates that division with the Department of Environmental Protection because those are the crews you see out in the street repairing water mains, some small, some very large, and with consequences that range from the transit system to swallowing people's cars. But they do more than fix water main breaks. Here's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing, at least economically. This is the Hillview Reservoir, which is located just north of the city line in Yonkers, and it's the last resting place for water before it goes into distribution through 3 city water tunnels and about 7,000 miles of water mains. So this reservoir is about 90 acres. And what's the challenge? Under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, reservoirs that hold treated water, and this one holds water that's already been through the ultraviolet plant and has been chlorinated twice, once at Kensico River upstream and once here at Hillview. The federal act requires the reservoir to be covered. Covering a 90-acre reservoir would cost an estimated $1.6 billion. There are a lot better uses we can spend $1.6 billion on. That part of the Safe Drinking Water Act doesn't currently provide any waivers for the requirement to cover. New York City got a deferral from the federal government to put off construction until at least the early 2020s, and we'll have to see how that plays out over the next few years. But despite presenting the federal government with thousands of data points showing that the quality of water exiting the reservoir is just as good as the water quality that comes into the reservoir. The system's very focused on metrics, and this is just one example of undertaking a very structured sewer inspection and cleaning program to maximize the designed sewer capacity throughout the 7,400 miles of sewers Over the 5-year period, we saw as a result of this a 50% decline in the number of confirmed sewer backups. We also, based on experience in a few other cities, we decided to introduce a service line protection program because the water service line that connects the city's water main to your home or your office building is the responsibility of the building owner. And when that or the sewer service line breaks, it can cost the homeowner up to $10,000 or more to repair it. So for a small monthly addition to the water bill, this voluntary program provides protection against a leak or breakage. The contractor will fix it at no additional charge. We got a much higher subscription rate than our vendor thought we would, and much higher than when this program was introduced in other cities. And it's produced benefits. It saved, at the time this chart was made, it saved the subscribing consumers who actually had leaks or sewer service line collapses over $33 million collectively. And as importantly, the blue line, which is the number of street leak complaints that get phoned into the 311 system, which cause our repair crews to go out and inspect and determine whether it's the city water main or service line. Our crews have to go out much less often now, and they can turn their attention to more proactive work like inspecting and maintaining the sewers and the water mains. Once we're done with the water and we flush the toilet and we empty the bathtub, and the water travels through 7,400 miles of sewers, then it becomes under the operational control of the Bureau of Wastewater Treatment. There are 14 wastewater treatment plants processing between 1.2 and 1.3 billion gallons of water a day. There are the color-coded sewer sheds associated with each of the plants. The plants themselves are the yellow dots. They're all located adjacent to the water. They were all vulnerable during Hurricane Sandy. And despite a program that we started 5 years before Sandy to invest capital funds to elevate critical components of the plant, such as electrical switchgear and main sewage pumps, so that they would be above what was expected to be the high water mark. Every one of the plants suffered damage, and collectively there was $100 million worth of damage from Hurricane Sandy. The good news is, through our own in-house forces and literally thousands of contractors coming to the rescue, we were able to bring 99% of our wastewater treatment capacity back online and meeting full regulatory compliance within 48 hours. The remaining 1%, the Rockaway plant, which arguably was surrounded on two sides by water, inundated from the north and the south, that took another 24 hours to repair. But we were much more fortunate than some of our fellow jurisdictions in surrounding communities whose wastewater treatment systems didn't fully come back online for more than 30 days after Sandy. Here, just some examples of wastewater infrastructure, big and small. The digester eggs at the Newtown Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant have become icons of sorts in New York. That plant just completed a 15-year, $5 billion upgrade. And next to it, one of our smallest pieces of infrastructure, green infrastructure, a curbside rain garden or bioswale, which draws stormwater away from the roadway and keeps it from going into our combined sewer system and causing combined sewer overflows. There are will be 11,000 of these ultimately in sections of Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx that are prone to combined sewer overflows. We have the Staten Island Blue Belt system, the ultimate green infrastructure project, which engineers water courses that naturally filter the water, stormwater, before it gets released to the harbor. And the wastewater system has its own fleet of 4 sludge-carrying vessels and its own marine crews in-house. And these vessels carry wastewater sludge from those plants that don't dewater it to those that do. And our wastewater treatment plants have unique challenges, mostly because it's hard to locate a wastewater treatment plant in New York. So you look at the bottom 2, and they are in sections of Brooklyn. They're right across the street from houses. And on the upper left is our North River treatment plant, which was built over the Hudson River. And as a benefit to the community for placing a wastewater treatment plant there, we built a state park, Riverbank State Park, on top of the wastewater treatment plant. Some people call it Sewage Park. Unfortunately, the state park system isn't as good as they might be in maintaining the drainage systems in the park. So literally, when it rains, it pours into the wastewater treatment plant. Other challenges, we have 2 Superfund sites in New York, the Gowanus Canal and Newtown Creek. And for the Gowanus Canal, the city is going to be constructing a several $100 million storage tank under an existing city park and swimming pool, which will detain stormwater until the storm is over and then pump it to the wastewater treatment plant. And this will help minimize the chance of combined sewer overflows into the Gowanus Canal. There have been developers who've been developed on speculation that the canal will get better. And so on the upper right, you see a luxury rental housing development called 360 Bond Street that opened in just the last year. Fully subscribed, the apartments are full. And so that's, I think, a portent of things to come after the canal is clean. And at the bottom, except for the Citibank building, all of those high rises you see were all built in Long Island City in the last 10 years, and they now house tens of thousands of new residents who, when Newtown Creek is cleaned up, can use that for recreation as well. Monitoring and wastewater treatment is very intensive as it is in the drinking water side, and we perform over 600,000 harbor water quality analyses a year. Keeping all of this going financially in a $3.7 billion a year enterprise can be challenging, but in 1984, the modern financial structure was established through state law. And you have the Department of Environmental Protection at the center operating and maintaining the water and wastewater system. You have on the left the New York Municipal Water Finance Authority, which sells bonds to fund the capital investment program. Currently, there's more than $30 billion in bonds outstanding. That creates a lot of debt service to pay annually. And you have the Water Board, whose sole purpose is, by state law, they must set rates for the water and wastewater system that cover all of the debt service, all of the operations and maintenance, and if the mayor requests it, an annual lease payment to the city for use of city infrastructure. We've been talking about water conservation tonight. It's certainly been a benefit in New York. This shows as the population, the green line has gone up significantly since 1980. Water consumption per day has decreased by about 33%. But there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there, because in terms of water rates, that decline in consumption in a water system that bills its customers totally based on the number of gallons they consume, the fewer gallons consumed, the smaller the denominator for dividing what's largely a fixed cost operation. And so we have our water customers, 836,000 of them, when they come to hearings about rates, are saying, you've told us for decades we need to conserve. We've been conserving, we've been reducing our water usage, and yet the water rates go up every year. So what gives? And you see that water rates peaked starting in 2009, and there were 4 consecutive years of double-digit rate increases. And that was the confluence of 3 factors. It was the accumulated effects of many years of water conservation. It was the peak of our capital investment, which caused a rise in debt service. And it was the inability of DEP to collect money from all of the water customers because people just didn't pay their water bills back then. New York City's water rates have been consistently right in the middle of the pack in terms of the 30 largest cities in the US. You can see New York in the center in the green bar, just about at the median and slightly below average. And when you look at the major components of the cost of living in New York, housing, fuel, cable TV, almost everything in New York is more expensive than it is in the rest of the country, except the bar all the way over to the right. That's what New Yorkers pay for water. It's 4% less than what others in large cities in the US pay. But here's the looming problem. I said it's a $3.7 billion enterprise. Debt service is the largest slice of the pie. It became the largest slice of the pie about 5 years ago, just following that peak in capital investment that started around 2006 and 2007. If you look at the trend over time, with the black bars being the amount we commit each year to capital contracts, the blue bars being annual capital expenditures, which lag behind the awarding of contracts, that even though the long-term trend in capital spending is down, the red line, which is annual debt service, keeps creeping up and will do so for the foreseeable future. Just about the time that I came to work at the New York City water system, we were facing a decision about whether to take a big risk, a $250 million risk, and launch an automated meter reading system, which would be the largest in the country. And we did it. Unlike most major technology projects undertaken by city government, this one was finished on time, on budget, and small additional aside, it worked. So water customers in New York before this got a bill every quarter, and it had 3 pieces of data on it: the meter reading, if you were lucky enough to have your meter read, at the beginning of the period, and the ending meter reading, and the difference between the two, and that translated into the amount you were asked to pay. But 20% of our meters never got read. A lot of estimated bills, a lot of water disputes, and people just didn't pay their bills. Now, any water customer can go online, and as on the left, they can see their water consumption for every day of the month, and on the right, they can see it in near real time for every hour of the day. This amount of data and the information that both our customers and our customer service representatives have reduced estimated bills by almost eliminated them entirely. They were sometimes over 20% of our bills. When this chart was made, they were less than 3%. Reduced the number of customer complaints about bills to almost nothing. When I started at DEP in 2006, we had a $100 million annual shortfall in our revenue collection. We had a revenue collection budget. We fell $100 million short of it. That was a problem. And you can see for the first 5 years of this chart, we underran the revenue collection budget by 5%, largely because of automated meter reading coupled with aggressive enforcement. By 2015, we were running a 5% revenue surplus. That equals $150 million. And we were able to turn that surplus revenue, and really just a small portion of it, turn it around and give it back in the form of rate reductions to seniors, disabled homeowners, and to affordable housing. We also enrolled 240,000 of our customers in automated leak notification. So the system will automatically send an email or a letter to the customer if the automated meter reading detects spikes in consumption. This has saved customers collectively versus the old way of getting your bill 3 months from now and seeing it's extraordinarily high. And meanwhile, you've racked up hundreds of dollars of excess water charges. This, at the time this chart was made, collectively saved our participants $80 million. The next big technological challenge in this area will be almost all of our customer buildings are now wired or wireless for automated meter reading. What's not metered currently are some of the city's biggest water users, Central Park, all the other big city parks, and a lot of other public spaces. So that's going to be a challenge over the coming decade. Meter those places, monitor water consumption, because we have part of the equation here with the system we installed, but we're still missing a piece in terms of being able to calculate with some precision what the amount of lost water is in New York. We only have a tool that we use from the American Water Works Association where we plug in data that we have, and we estimate that we're losing somewhere between 17 and 20% of our water. But as plentiful as our water supply is now, it may not always be that way. And so that'll be the next big technological leap. Thank you for your indulgence. Have a good evening. Thank you.